Hello, everyone. Welcome to IPWatchdog Unleashed, where each week we journey into the world of intellectual property to discuss the laws, news, policy, and politics of innovation, technology, and creativity. With analysis and commentary from industry thought leaders and newsmakers from around the world, IPWatchdog Unleashed is hosted by world-renowned patent attorney and the founder of IPWatchdog.com, Quinn, who has twice been named one of the most influential people in the intellectual property community and recognized numerous times as one of the top IP strategists in the world. Take it away, Gene.
Thanks, Renee. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on this edition of IPWatchdog Unleashed. Today I have a special guest. I know I say that all the time, but I guess it's good to have a lot of good friends and popular friends. And the person we're going to hear from today is absolutely both of those things. Megan Carpenter. Megan is the former dean of the University of New Hampshire, although I always think about it as Franklin Pierce because that's where I went to law school. Megan just stepped down. We'll ask her about that. But she was the dean of Franklin Pierce for most of the last decade. And she's a law professor before that, and she's a trademark expert, and she's written extensively on IP. We'll ask her about all of those things. But Megan, thanks for being here.
I'm so excited to be here with you, Gene. Thanks.
It's good to see you. And I guess the first thing that I have to ask you about is what went into the decision to decide that it was enough time? And I know a little bit because we've had a bit of a conversation, but when people ask you why, because being a dean for a lot of people is sort of the pinnacle and you fight to get those jobs. If it was a head coach, you'd never see a head coach just retire, not until they were ready to carry the person out. And the dean is sort of, in a lot of ways, the head coach. So what went into that decision?
When I joined Franklin Pierce, I've always admired Franklin Pierce as a law school and its role in the IP community. When I joined, it was in a bit of a crisis situation regarding enrollment numbers, relationships with alumni, its influence in the IP world, and its prioritization and focus there. So I've spent a lot of time at Franklin Pierce rebuilding those relationships authentically and remembering who we are now, being tied absolutely to our founding, which was really to not just teach students to think like lawyers, but also to be lawyers and to lead in the IP space. And I have absolutely loved every minute of it. I met with alumni after I had taken the job and before I started, and said, what could we do differently? And they had a lot to say. Our alumni are very opinionated in great ways. They said, you guys just seem to meet with us and ask us for money, but you haven't really built genuine relationships over the last 10 or so years. So we focused on developing educational programs that are practical, that fit students' needs wherever the students are located, and rebuilding relationships not just across the United States, but through global partnerships. And we took our enrollment from 70-some students when I started to a historical high of about 250 students starting. And our applications were at 400-something when I started, and they were at 1,500 this past year. And our alumni engagement in programs, we had the highest giving year ever in recorded history at the school with 3 7-figure gifts last year. And our alumni participation, not just in amount, but in number, we had from 2.7% alumni giving to over 11% giving. And so we've done all of this as a team, and it has been an absolute joy. But I also know that there are so many opportunities in the IP space and the tech space. And I think that, deans, the average tenure for a law school dean right now is somewhere between 2.5 years and 3 years. I was at Franklin Pierce for 8.5 years, and sort of like dog years, I think. So it's more like 56 or so years. And so while it has been the absolute joy of my professional life to help the school come back to its identity and relationships and leadership in the IP space, I've realized that I like building, and there are a lot of challenges when it comes to our global community in the IP world. Needs to the need to kind of build trust in IP systems and strengthen IP systems, both in our country and globally. And so I'm ready for a new challenge. And I realized that the more I was thinking about a new challenge, it felt like I wanted to announce that I was stepping down so I could have those conversations and explore those opportunities.
Yeah, there's a lot there to talk about. But picking up on the last thing that you said first, I'm a big UFC fan. I have a second degree black belt from a long time ago, but I work out, and that's probably why I had so many hip problems over the years. But they always say, like, when the fighter starts thinking about retirement, you are already retired and it's dangerous. You just need to stop because your mind's not in it anymore. That was the one thing that came out. The other thing I think that what I heard you saying was, it sounds like very entrepreneurial. You know, there are people, and I've had a lot of students over the years, and I've given advice to, some of whom have started at now very large companies. They were not large when they were there, employee 3, 4, 5, and now they're big. There've been buyout, there've been mergers, and over the years, I've told a number of people, it's like, well, you got to decide whether you want to stick around, because I think there is a skill set for those people who are the early employees, the founders of the company, certainly entrepreneurs, and that skill set doesn't translate very well usually to a mature corporation. And I never thought about law like that, but I was one of those people who did give you some advice when you started, I know for sure. And it was frustrating to watch Franklin Pierce fall from what it had been. I don't know that a lot of people in the community would say we fell, but there was taking the eye off the ball for more than a minute at Franklin Pierce that was very frustrating. And you've got that back. You've gotten the focus back on IP, and it's growing, and I think that's great. And so I guess the question I have is, so where do you go next? Do you see yourself doing more entrepreneurial stuff? Do you see yourself taking some time to recharge your batteries and then going back into the law school world, going into government, or maybe an association? I could see a lot of different fits for you. Have you given any thought?
I have given it some thought. And for me, my motto is really, a change is as good as a rest. I don't rest well. I don't relax well. Even if I'm with family watching TV, I'm usually folding laundry or making lists or doing something all at the same time. So I'm never idle for long. I'm having some of those conversations now. I'm not sure exactly what's next for me. I know that there just seems to be so much need right now for education in all different formats, for advocacy, for building relationships and partnerships. But right now, one thing I'm going to do is, one of my New Year's resolutions the last few years has been to just do hard things. And so I'm going to leave for Tanzania in like a week and a half, and I'm going to try to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do it. I was at REI the other day getting some gear, and I tripped on the sidewalk on my way out. And
did it give you pause?
It gave me, I thought, if I can't make it on a trip to REI, I might really struggle. But so that's first, and I'll be there for a lot of the month of February doing that climb.
So that's what I was going to ask you. How long does it take? How long is it anticipated to take?
It's anticipated to take, if I, barring, being escorted down the mountain for one reason or another, it'll be a 6-day climb up and then a pretty quick climb back down.
Mm-hmm. So is that 6 days like all at once, or is this? Forgive me. I know Kilimanjaro from there's songs, so I don't know how high it is. I know when you're climbing Everest, you have to go up, take a stop, acclimate, go up, take a stop. Is that sort of the same thing, or is it just easier, like day after day after day, to just keep going?
There is a piece every day. Each day there are different amounts of climbing that take place. There are different paths up, and this is one of the shorter paths up. I think altitude sickness is one of the biggest issues that might come up.
So you say shortest path up, I hear steepest.
Yeah, I'm worried about that. So, so you can do a 9-day trek up This is a 6-day, and each day is different lengths and different steepness. I think the last day involves a 16-hour climb up and part down. Also the coldest. We start at 80 or 90 degrees at the bottom, and then it might be -20 at the top.
So I was going to say, sign me up for the 60-day trek up the mountain. But if it gets that cold, I can see why you would want to get up and down really quick.
Yeah.
Well, good for you. What made you want to do that, and why pick Kilimanjaro out of all the other options?
2 years ago, for my birthday, I climbed Fuji. I really enjoyed that. It was a 2-day climb. I had thought about Kilimanjaro for a long time. In fact, I'd made a reservation to do it before COVID hit. And so it was postponed at that point. But it's really hard to think about taking, with travel time, that much time away from work. So this seemed to be the perfect time to both do something difficult and that has a high risk of failure, and also to take that time.
Now or never.
Yes. I'm not great at exercising, just generally. If I'm training for something difficult, then that isn't a good inspiration to exercise. But I never sort of wake up thinking, I can't wait to exercise today. So this is, I need a big goal to be able to commit myself to doing the regular day-to-day work.
I suppose goals definitely help. But I do, and this, I know a lot of people just laugh when they hear this, but I've exercised my whole life. Now, obviously, when I got very heavy, I had some serious physical limitations with both hips, and one of my hips had it replaced, and it just there were errors made. I spent 10 years trying to figure out what those were, and then finally found a doctor who told me what they were and helped correct it. And that's why now all of a sudden people see me and I'm down, not to where I want to be, but I'm down a lot. And I'm actually, so for me, I look forward to getting up in the morning to go to the gym and exercise. And I shared with you, I just pulled a muscle in my back at the office. We extended our stage at the studio, and I was bent over, awkward, not lifting very much, and I pulled a muscle, and I'm thinking in my head, oh my God, please, this is not going to take me out of my workout routine, although I guess Snowmageddon will probably do that as well for a while. But I do really enjoy working out, and it is a time for me to put my brain on pause, all the things that are going on. Is that climbing for you? Do you get that kind of euphoria out of it, or peace, or how would you describe it?
I do. I love those moments where, in order to kind of relax, I think I was saying a few minutes ago that I'm not great at relaxing. And so I think for me to relax, to engage my body in something that requires my full attention is a really excellent way for me to process my thoughts, to make big decisions. I had thought about stepping down for a long time, and I did for the last year or so, I did a pilgrimage climb in Japan in September that sort of crystallized next steps for me. And it was a pilgrimage trail on the Kamano Kodo Trail. It was across a peninsula, and it involved some hikes of one day 9 miles, one day 15 miles. And it was a sort of up and down. And when I'm engaged, skiing is the same way for me. I'm not good at it, but maybe because I'm not good at it, it takes my brain completely out of it. I'm out of my own head, and I'm just focused on my body in that kind of flow state. And I think that really helps me to deal with anything that happens to be going on at a particular time.
So all the time I was in New Hampshire, I did not ski once. The reason is, before, when I was in college, I went skiing. I loved skiing, and I landed on my head, and I thought to myself, why am I doing this? I like it, but I'm not terribly good at it. And I just walked away, never to ski again. And so skiing is not that for me. I think of skiing, I think of broken bones and a concussion. And I hear you talk about all these climbs and stuff. I climbed Mount Washington in New Hampshire, but that's
really impressive.
Well, but it's 5,000 feet. I don't know whether it still has this distinction, but when I was in New Hampshire, it was the deadliest mountain in the world. And because you set out at the bottom, like, of course, but it's warm. And then it gets colder and colder as you go up. And since it's accessible to so many people at, 5,000-ish feet, everybody, no matter what your shape is, you think you can do it. And it is also one of the most windy spots in the entire world. And if you're not paying attention to the weather and you haven't brought jackets, people get way over their skis. But good for you that you're going to do this. I hope it works out well for you. So we know that short term you're going to go and try this, and good for you on that. We know that you don't yet know exactly what's going to be coming up next. So maybe what we do is we take a step back and we talk about how you got here. One of the things I've started asking people in these conversations is, how did you get into the IP field to start with?
When I found myself in communities as I was growing up that were fairly, I always loved music, and I had a lot of friends who were musicians. I did a lot of creative writing as I was growing up. Wrote a lot of bad poetry as a teenager, probably about, rainbows and unicorns and love. And really kind of operated in a lot of had a lot of artistic friends. And then when I started in law school and I started my career at K&L Gates, which was K&L at the time, I loved the logic of legal analysis and practice. And K&L had a particular program where you would try different things that, you'd spend a few months in one area and a few months in another. And there was an email system for work assignments, and something came up that was in the trademark space. And I always grabbed everything that came up. And so I said, I'll do it. They called me Radar from MASH because I was just sort of eager to, accomplish whatever it was. And so I took this trademark assignment, didn't know anything about trademarks, had not taken an IP class in law school. We really didn't have a robust IP curriculum. And I absolutely loved it. The next time, something that was trademark focused or copyright focused, ended up working on some patent litigation. And it just, one thing grew to another. One of the clients of the firm was World Wrestling Federation Entertainment. And so by the end, probably about 90% of my practice was in the professional wrestling space.
Did you meet anybody interesting?
I was going back and forth to headquarters. Believe it or not, there was no one at the time in-house who was an IP attorney. They had one paralegal. I met a few people in corporate, no wrestlers, but most of my time was really, we did a huge audit of their IP. Our team was involved in, some people I worked with filed the first UDRP action in the world. We were heavily involved in determining character rights, copyright and trademark rights, thinking about kind of some of the signature moves of our wrestlers, being effectively trademarks, and then doing a lot of enforcement. I recently heard from someone, we were sending cease and desists for people pirating some of our TV shows, and someone whose site I shut down at the time was a young person who wrote to me just a few months ago. And this was like 2 decades ago. And he wrote to me a few months ago saying that when I shut down his site, it changed. I think he went on the internet talking about, I put the smack in SmackDown or something. And he said it inspired him to go to law school and become an IP attorney. So was talking about sort of how that influenced his career and how mean I was. But anyway, I absolutely loved every minute of what I was doing. And people will say in law school that the kinds of arguments you make in law school, you never really get to make those in real life. But with that kind of a client, the client was open to the kind of creative law practice and arguing and pushing the envelope in ways that I think were really unique and intellectually. This was the early 2000s, and it was just with the internet.com explosion, They were starting a football league, the XFL at the time. They were starting a media company with music. And so there was so much to be done. And then at a certain point, I realized I absolutely loved what I was doing every day. Yet I felt like I was lacking some of the academic background in IP. And I also didn't feel great sometimes about some of the work we were doing. I think the last thing I did was to shut down a small record label, a small jazz label. And so I quit my job and sold my home, and I moved to Ireland to get an advanced degree in international human rights, thinking about how legal frameworks create haves and have-nots around the world, and to more fully understand the frameworks around human creativity and ingenuity. That was such an interesting lens to look at IP and emerging technologies. And then I came back to the United States and started teaching and did some practice on the side in the IP and entertainment space.
So I want to ask you something. And I'm not nitpicking at you, but I think I heard you say the word ingenuity. Now, was that a slip or was that on purpose? Because I like it. It seems like you were thinking ingenuity and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, it was a slip because I was thinking about entrepreneurship and ingenuity and just combined the two.
And but that works really, because that's what makes our world go around. The entrepreneur and the small innovator, whether it's patents or whether it's copyrights or whether it's, other forms of creativity that exhibit in trademarks or that the trademark protects the brand. There needs more of that happens with the small actor and the risk taker, and it does require some genius, really. And I think that's a great term, and we may need to trademark that term because it does fit very well. And I know WIPO has been doing a lot of things all around the world. Darren Tang, who's the director general, who did a podcast with us a few months ago. I forget how he described it, but the way I would describe it is working with, in maybe not third world countries, but working in developing countries and helping underrepresented communities identify their own creativity and what they can do with it. There's a bit of mentoring and follow-up, and he was particularly happy with what they've been able to succeed with in Africa, and helping people who had never thought about being an entrepreneur, never thought that they were creative enough to have something that others would want to pay for. And they build a company, they create employees, you're just employing the community, some of these businesses, and they're thriving and succeeding. And it does get me excited. And I see the spark in your eye when you're talking about that as well.
I'm just starting to lead a task force for IPWatchdog, which is the IP professionals organization for across Latin America. And we're going to be working in conjunction with WIPO to think about ways to increase the innovation ecosystem across Latin America. WIPO has the Global Innovation Index, where it measures and ranks countries according to how much innovation they have. And there are about 78, almost 80 different indicators that they use to reflect the innovation level in different countries around the globe. And there are some countries in Africa that have increased in the GII recently, Middle East, the same. And one of the things we're working through the leadership of IPWatchdog is to identify a few countries across Latin America that are at risk of falling out of the GII or perhaps have never been ranked in the GII, and then think about how do we coordinate that kind of information to make sure that all the data is getting to WIPO so that it accurately reflects the innovation that's happening, and then to think about how those ecosystems might be fortified to increase innovation. I mean, there is not a challenge that we face around the world that I think doesn't have an IP component to it. If we're talking about trade and finance, if we're talking about climate change, if we're talking about, whatever it is that we're discussing, health issues, it's all based in human on Ingenuity.
Yeah, no, it is. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking of a friend of mine from a long time ago who we kind of fell out of touch. You do this sometimes, right? Eric Iverson. He is at Wharf. Now, he runs Wharf's technology transfer program. I think he's more than that, though. I think he's a real sharp guy, and he's a leader in the industry. And I met him a long time ago when he was working out in Seattle. I think he was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they were working on infectious diseases. And his view of intellectual property was that we're getting intellectual property so that we can participate in this ecosystem to then try and accomplish the goals that we want to accomplish. So we have the rights. We can incentivize people. We have these rights. We can work with you. You can work with us. You can have some of these rights. It felt to me like, and I don't know how he would describe it, but it felt to me like what he was describing was what I always talked about when we were kids, flipping baseball cards in the restroom or at recess. You couldn't engage in trading baseball cards or flipping baseball cards if you didn't have baseball cards. If you had them, you could participate. And I think that's what IP does in the human rights area, in the public sector, health space like infectious diseases, is if you don't have IP, it's a hard sell to go to somebody who does have IP and says, oh, you should help this underprivileged community. Mm-hmm. But if I have something that might be interesting to you, and you have something that would be interesting to help the people that I want to help, now there's a deal that can be done. So I do think IP really is at the center of so much stuff, and I think people miss that more because they see greed. There's greed in this community, like every other community. It's one of the 7 deadly sins, right? Everybody experiences it probably at some point, but you don't have to be greedy. And I think a lot of people in our space want to do good. And IP is a vehicle to do that.
I also think that IP is the legal framework around human creativity. So it's going to reflect all that we are in all of the creative aspects of what it is to be human. So I think it's absolutely incumbent upon us here in the U.S. and globally speaking as well, but to strengthen our IP systems to make sure that they're strong across the entire life cycle, and then to rebuild trust in that system. What you're talking about, there's IP in so many ways has this problem of messaging and public perception. During COVID, when you would think that the pharmaceutical industry would have had this sort of, humans would have had a love affair with the development of medicines and R&D. I remember walking in D.C. and seeing in the bus shelters or kiosks big signs that say patents kill. I think that we have a lot to do from a PR perspective and a communications and education perspective around IP frameworks as well.
So patents kill fits on a bumper sticker, which is problematic because the pro-IP message does not fit on a bumper sticker. And when you put it on a bumper sticker, people just don't believe it. And it's been frustrating for me because the other side that doesn't like patents, for example, or doesn't like any form of IP, rips it down so casually and cavalier. And the truth of the matter is, so like when I used to teach in law school and I would have a student that was IP skeptical, let's say, I would just ask them, do you like art? Everybody likes art, some kind of art, right? Whatever art means to you, you like it. I like Van Gogh. I don't know why, but when I look at a Van Gogh painting, I just like him better than any other painter. I always loved his paintings. What if Van Gogh was alive today, and had to be working at McDonald's flipping burgers 40 to 50 hours a week? Would we get more Van Gogh paintings or would we get less Van Gogh paintings? Clearly the answer is less. Back then they had a patronage system. Somebody like, if I had enough money, like Van Gogh, hey, come and live in my villa, paint all day long. And that's how these great masters would be able to paint and live. And now we have a system where the marketplace decides whether or not what you're creating is good enough for people to pay money for it, in which case then you can make a living and you can do more of it. So the same kind of rules apply. Patronage did it one way, IP, the whole community, everybody gets to decide. And if enough people like what you're doing, you make money and you can just do more of it. What I don't understand that the naysayers of IP, they don't seem to get that the stronger the IP is, the more of it we get. Because then people don't have to be flipping burgers. They don't have to be doing construction. But I think we also need more artists doing stuff that people can appreciate. It makes life beautiful and meaningful. For me, one of the things I always used to do, and I don't know why we stopped doing it, but we were doing every 4th of July, a different person in the IP community, and it's like, give us your top 20 songs of all time. People were like, why are you doing this? I had a conversation. It was like, because I think music, I pick the songs I pick, and they probably be different today. It's emotional. They bring out an emotion. And I want more of that. I think art brings out emotion. I think paintings obviously bring out emotion. It is frustrating to me that what we do gets challenged so often, and it's so easy to cut it down and minimize the value. And I'll throw one more thing out there, and then you can react to any of this. I am not a fan of DEI, because I think DEI, as it turned out to be, was equality of outcome. But what I am totally involved with, into my whole being, is equality of opportunity. And I look at the underrepresented communities, and I look at a lot of people, and just even in the U.S., who live in places where the education system isn't particularly good. The streets are dangerous. How can you get an education if the school isn't good and you're worrying about getting shot walking home? There are so many people out there that could be creative. They could have cures for cancer. They could do really great things. And we're letting them down because the education isn't working, the communities aren't working. If we could lift all those people up and give them the opportunity, how many people would take it to the next level? And that's what I think of IP, because it's a great equalizer. My dad worked in a factory. We came from nothing. I lived in a 1,300 square foot house growing up, and that's because my dad finished the basement and the attic. It was a tiny house. But because of the things I've been able to do in education and through IPWatchdog with the creativity that we've done there, I've been able to make a pretty good living out of it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that could do that. So I know there's a lot on the table, but what say you?
That is a lot. And so I was just actually listening to an interview that Mark Cuban did with Lex Friedman the other day, and he was talking about some of these issues, including as they connect to entrepreneurship generally. One of the things that he was saying that is really reflected in my own experience is just that when you have diverse teams of people with different perspectives, that better decisions get made. I mean, if I'm making strategic decisions, any kind of decision, I always want to have people at the table who will bring perspectives that I may not be seeing. And I definitely want someone at the table who's going to be inclined to disagree with me. My favorite collaborations over time have been with people who make me see things in a different way that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I do think that intellectual property helps with that. I mean, knowing musicians, you have environments where it's so important that we protect the rights that will enable people to participate in those kinds of free markets. I grew up in an environment that was interesting. My dad lived in D.C. and my mom lived in West Virginia. And I went to public school in Appalachia most of my life. And for the last 2 years of high school, went to a girls' boarding school in McLean, Virginia. The educational experiences were extremely different, and I'm glad that I had both. The boarding school was an all-girls school. Some of the girls I was in school with at the time had never really been in school with boys. And I feel like, on the other hand, there were educational opportunities that were available at the boarding school that I never would have had growing up in West Virginia. When I got there, they didn't give any merit scholarships, and they told me they were giving me a $300 scholarship to attend cultural events. And I remember thinking, I must be such a good student that they broke their rules and they're giving me a scholarship. And later I realized, like, wait a second, I think they were like, here's the country girl from West Virginia. She needs some culture. Yeah, let's send her to some plays at the Kennedy Center or the Trump Kennedy Center. And so having that kind of opportunity, I think, giving people education can help encourage them to let them know that they can do anything. I mean, you asked me what we were going to discuss on this podcast, and you said one thing that you might ask me is what I would say to a younger me. And so our conversation now is reminding me of that. I've given some thought to it. And one of the things that I always come back to is this quote from something that Steve Jobs said, and I will completely get it wrong, but he said something like, life becomes broader the moment that you realize that everything that's created in what we call life was created by people who are no smarter than you, and that you can influence it, you can change it, you can build things. And that, to me, helping people understand that this is all up to us. Human beings have built all of this, and you can have an enormous impact in the world. We need people now, perhaps more than ever, to help chart creative and innovative ingenuity. As we go forward. I mean, that, I think, is what I would remind that girl growing up in small town West Virginia. And it's what I would tell students, and it's what I would tell IP attorneys today. I mean, we are extraordinarily privileged because not only can we be those people as IP attorneys and educators, and entrepreneurs, but we also can facilitate other people doing those things as well. And so that just, to me, feels like an incredibly privileged position to be in, and one that we can embrace with open arms.
You know, as you were saying that, I know I told you I might ask that question, and I don't know what I would say. What advice would I give a younger Gene? I fear that if I talk to my younger self, I would put ideas in that person's head that then would lead them to just make all kinds of different mistakes in life. It is interesting to think about the journey that has got you where you're at. And there's things that I would probably do differently, I suppose. But that's when I think of those, I'm like, I would just wind up making all different mistakes. The one thing that jumps to my mind, for example, would be is go find Renee sooner. Like stalk her, find her, do research to figure out, and then that would go bad because we met each other at a certain time when both of us were in a right place at a right time. We were looking for potentially for something or willing to consider the idea of something more seriously. In times of my life, I was not. And if I had burned that bridge and met her back then, who knows, what would have happened. But is there anything in your life that if you could go back that you would do differently, or that you would say, like, I need to do more of that, even if it's just something like I'll give you another, for instance, and this year I accomplished this goal. At the end of every college football season, I always say, next year I'm going to watch more college football, because that is one thing I really just enjoy doing. For most of the time, I can be doing other stuff and have the game on and watching the good plays and rewinding and everything. But it's something I really do enjoy, like just accomplishing nothing, right? And I really get into it. And this year I did accomplish that. And I got to the end of the season now, and I look back and I'm like, I don't know that I really, if I watched more, I don't know that it would have gotten any greater pleasure out of it. I think I hit the right amount, which was a lot. So is there anything like that like you wish you could do more of, or that you wish as a younger person you would have done more of?
Well, I do. There was that moment I remember when I was a junior associate practicing and the news reports were coming out and saying that it's like the end of the year, talking about how Amazon probably is not going to make anything of itself because it continues to lose money. So probably then double down on Amazon stock would be the right.
Yeah, or Microsoft.
I would do that different. Yeah, exactly. Apple,
or
Nvidia, to give a more recent
Tesla.
example.
I mean, yeah. So like, there's all the that I would tell
Right.
myself. Like,
Yeah.
my dad, the one advice he got from one of his friend's uncles was to buy Fujifilm. And then Fujifilm blew up, and film turned out to be the most lucrative product of all time.
Really?
Yeah, because, and I don't know how Fuji did. Fuji had its moment for sure, and they're probably still, I think they still exist, and they're still making money. But with Kodak, the reason Kodak missed on digital photography after inventing it, I met Steve Sasson, who is the inventor of digital photography, and he named it filmless photography. So I got to sit next to him in a Hall of Fame induction dinner, and I asked him, how did you have enough guts to call it filmless photography? And he said, don't you really want to ask me why I was so stupid? Because film was the most lucrative product. It took almost nothing to make, like a penny or some ridiculously low amount of money to make a film. And then they could turn around and flip that for $4, $5, $6 for, and this is back in the day, right? This is back when we were kids. I'm trying to remember what the prices were. They weren't very much, but you get like 10 pictures or 12 pictures, or if you want to, like, for $10 or $12, you could get 24 pictures on film. And that cost them almost nothing to produce. So when he came up with filmless photography, they're like, okay, no, we need to bury that. And so that's why Kodak, probably one of the reasons, in retrospect, why they went bankrupt, and why so many others made a lot of money on digital photography when they made very little or nothing, really. So there's all those kinds of opportunities out there. And that has been fun in my position. I've met some really interesting people. Had dinner with one of the guys who was involved in the team that invented Prozac. The one common thread of that, literally, and both of those guys are in the Hall of Fame, the Inventors Hall of Fame, is just how humble they are. I met a few times Art Fry, who's the inventor of Post-it notes. And it's almost like he, in particular, is like he doesn't understand why there's such a hubbub about what he did. You know, it's just like, it's what you do as an inventor. But these things they're just so humble. And I do think that sometimes those, maybe not those guys, but inventors are, to some extent, their own worst enemy, because they do invent and will invent. And there's a class of those people that are just going to constantly tinker and constantly invent. And people will say, oh, they don't really need the rights. They're going to do it anyway. They may do it, but if there's no rights to be had and no money to be made, these things are not going to go out into the market.
I always think of a story where when I was, I had a dog and my brother had a dog, and we would, in the summer, go back to where we're from in West Virginia, and we live right along a river, and my parents do, and so we would, I'd throw a stick for my dog, and she'd go and she'd fight the current, and she'd love it, and she'd go get the stick, and I'm cheering her on, and my brother's dog would just kind of sit on the shore. I'm yelling for her, and you can see her little tail wagging above the river, and she brings it back. And then my brother's dog would just reach out and grab the stick from her. And I think of that as sort of IP rights, So
Yep.
she did the labor, the work to go in. Why would she do that if she can't protect the stick? If you can just reach out and grab it after somebody's done all of that hard work, then, what incentive does she have to go to do all of that labor to go get the stick the next time?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely, that's a great story. Because that's life, right? Yeah. There's always people that will be there to take advantage of somebody. And what we see now in the U.S. with patent rights, there's a whole lot of people that are able. And frankly, I don't know that if I were an in-house attorney or if I was at a firm where those big tech companies were seeking advice from, it would probably be malpractice to tell them not to just take the stick, because they don't have to pay. The courts don't. And even if they get caught with their hand in the cookie jar, this federal circuit, and I've been talking to people increasingly about that. This came up in a recent podcast with this federal circuit is allergic to $1 billion verdicts. They would disagree. And I think they have said, oh, there's no magic number. Of course there is. The fact that they don't admit it is cute and annoying all at the same time, but it clearly exists. And I think it's closer to $100 million. They reheard the Google Ecofactor case, over $20 million,
And at that point, it just becomes transactional.
It's ridiculous. I think what you see is people just taking advantage of what's out there. I always go back to like the scene from The Godfather, or it's nothing personal. It's just business. And if the law will allow those big tech companies to do this, I don't think it is personal.
No, of course not. I mean, it's just
logical.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so that really does suck. And I don't know where we go with that, because just business 101, if you have a product, you don't usually want to move on to the next product until you've milked everything out of this product that you can. And what changes that equation is when somebody else makes an advance and now everybody moves to that product and leaves you behind, and you weren't able to milk everything that you thought you could have. But in a slow-moving innovation ecosystem, you can squeeze a lot out before, well, now we've got super saturation in the market. Now we've got to offer something, reset and start over. So I think one of the reasons why a lot of the big tech gadgets and services and software hasn't progressed faster. Like we saw, the iPhone was super exciting. Like, is the next version of the iPhone so much better that you have to have it?
It's in yellow or it's in orange.
Right.
That's the big innovation.
It used to be, I need to have it. Right? It's a big advance. And I don't see that. And I think the reason for that is the diminution in the value of IP, because you don't have to worry about the upstart.
Do you think the increase in pools, sort of creating more transactional between licensors and licensees, does that have a potential to take something transactional and make it productive for both sides?
Well, I think patent pools are really good. The problem, I think, is, and my friends who operate in the pool space probably won't like it, but I'm going to say this anyway. I think often a lot of pools are made up of technology that is not the most cutting edge technology. And there may be exceptions, and I may be completely wrong. And if I am wrong, I'm sure people reach out to me and educate me. And if I'm wrong, we'll do another episode on patent pools and we'll correct all these mistakes. But in my mind, it seems like the patents that get in the pools are a little bit older, still relevant. I mean, there's still 3G, 2G, some 2G patents are still relevant. 4G certainly, and even though we're on 6G in innovation, and probably even people are moving beyond that. It's not like it's irrelevant technology, but I think it's a way that you can go in and you can collect a whole bunch of rights without needing a bunch of negotiating. This is the price. This is what everybody pays. It seems very equal. Everybody gets paid. So I like the fact that in patent pools, everybody gets paid. Everybody knows what the price is. You want it, you can have it. And I think that's great. I don't know that I feel like that happens with the latest cutting edge stuff. What Avanci has done, I think that they managed to figure out a way to put these things together in a way for the automakers that does make sense. It is relevant. These are the rights that they need. And it was like $30 or $35, a car. And to me, it's like these cars anymore are like $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 for nothing. You're not talking about a Ferrari or a Maserati. I mean, you're talking about a Hyundai or a Ford. And so an extra $30 for the innovators who have put all the cool stuff like the cameras and the internet, entertainment systems and all that kind of stuff into the cars doesn't strike me as crazy. I mean, I'd pay an extra $30 for the car if it had all that. I mean, it'd be way more valuable. So I do think that some folks have figured it out, and I would like to see more of that. But you know, Jay Walker, he was the founder of Priceline. He's got like 1,000 or more patents. I met him a number of years ago, and he, along with Judge Michelle, was on his board at the time, not Priceline board, but he was trying to create this system for licensing that would collect all these rights, much like you might with a pool. But it was more, I think it was more siloed. Like, you want the rights for this. Here are all the patents from all the different players that you need. And he was trying to create a marketplace. And it just didn't go anywhere because of efficient infringement. You know, why do I need to pay for these things? And so I think that there's a lot of creative business models out there like that, like pools, like other things, that if we could get to a place where people were actually incentivized to license, it would make a lot of sense. I say this over and over again, and I'd like to get your take on it. I feel like patent law in the U.S. in particular drives people into litigation because if you have rights, it's the only thing you can do because nobody's going to pay you willingly. And I think the law operates best, and I think this is the Coase theorem or piece of the Coase theorem. It operates best when you're pushing people and incentivizing people to come to arm's length negotiations and resolutions. And somewhere along the way, this idea of, well, you never have to worry about an injunction, you don't have to worry about billion-dollar damages, no matter what the math says, has pushed people away from wanting to do arm's length negotiating. And I think that that's exactly the wrong thing.
Yeah. And that's why I really asked the question, is because I'm wondering if there are opportunities to create licensing marketplaces so we're not looking at this injunction, litigation, binary choice in this environment where there's a lot of gray area. If people might be incentivized to create marketplaces that could also incentivize patenting in a way that perhaps hasn't existed.
Well, I think there's clearly a path that way. And I think you get a bunch of smart people. I have a bunch of ideas. And you get a bunch of smart people in the room. I think you could figure all this out. But when I started my career, I heard more than one judge, and not the same judge repeatedly, but the judges felt like once upon a time that they were trying to get cases to settle because they wanted people. I had one judge who I clerked with explain to me why that was. It's like, look, if I make a decision, I'm going to make a decision based on what I think is best for you and what I think is best for the other side. I may have it totally wrong. You may think what I think is important for you is the least important factor, and vice versa. So he said, and I've heard many judges say this, is like, go out in the hall and settle this, because if I make a decision, it's going to upset everybody. And that was why I asked one judge this time, I'm like, well, what do you really, it's not spite. It's not like I'm going to try and, it's like, I have no idea what matters to you. Figure out what matters to you and what you're willing to give the other side and what matters to them, and come to it together. Because if I impose a decision, I can guarantee you neither of you are going to like it. But you can all live with something you sign.
I think even calling it settling seems like the wrong kind of framing. Perhaps, thinking about it more as a proactive transaction is something that's better. Do you think that AI could be good for the courtroom in that way, or no?
What I will say is, I know a lot of people are fearful that, AI is going to invent a lot of things and nothing's going to be patentable anymore and take a lot of jobs away. I have seen nothing yet to suggest that AI is capable of original thought. What AI is really good at is going through large amounts of information and distilling it, summarizing it, putting it back. And it looks often to you like, oh my God, that's genius. I wouldn't have thought of that. And all they're doing is taking the information that you gave them or the trainer gave them and distilling it and putting it back. And then when you see what comes back, that's when the moment happens and you appreciate these things. I see no sign that we're going to have robot overlords anytime that's relevant. But that's not to say that AI isn't really, really useful tool. I do think what AI could probably be really good in the courtroom is judges maybe using it to make sure that they're seeing the whole field, and that if I make this decision, what might be the consequences of that, or am I leaving something out? or something like that?
I'm working with the National Center for State Courts right now on this kind of project. They're working on an AI pilot project with Thomson Reuters. And so I'm chairing their rules and practices committee. And one of the things we're looking at is how to deal with evidence, acknowledged AI evidence and unacknowledged deepfake evidence. It's one of the things that's been really interesting to me is the prevalence of AI in the courtroom through briefs in the practice of law, through evidentiary pieces, and a need for real education in the judiciary around some of the components of what that means and what the implications are. And so it's the Wild West, I think, right? That
It is, and I had really worried that what was going to happen with AI and the tools is those people at the beginning of their careers are going to get cut out and left behind. I say all the time, it's like you don't need to go to India to get drafting anymore. You can do it here in the U.S. AI as a first draft gets you way down the road. Very good stuff coming out. So why hire somebody else to get you that far? Use the AI yourself interactively and come up with an amazing first draft and then polish it up. And but I have changed my mind. I think that the thing that law schools should be teaching lawyers, and I don't know that any are yet, is about prompting AI, because that is a skill set in and of itself. Because if you leave AI to its own devices, you may get what you want, and you may get totally irrelevant garbage. Or if not garbage, just certainly not the quality that you can. But if you're good at prompting and know how AI accepts information and delivers information, I think there's this niche there where older people are not, it's hard to learn, can't teach an old dog new tricks. I mean, these sayings mean something, right? It's very difficult to teach an older person how to use the latest computer technology. So, and you joke around, like if you get a new piece of technology, a new phone or whatever, what you need to do is go find the youngest person in the room and ask them to show you how to do it. And I think what we need to be teaching these young aspiring attorneys is how to prompt AI and get them doing that for 3 years so that when they come out, they're going to be invaluable. That in combination with somebody who's been practicing for 30 years, that's a partner-associate tandem that is going to be really hard to beat.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of interviewers to hire junior associates at firms that are asking just as a standard question, what AI tools, what's your facility with AI? What tools are you using? And some law schools are really not embracing that in their educational programs. And I had one student at a school in Texas come up to me and say, I'm being asked in interviews, but my school won't let me use it, and they're not teaching us to use it. So how do I do that? And I just think there's so much, and the prompting will change over time. So it's not like often in higher education, you develop a course and then that course stays the same. And so this is not the kind of evergreen skill set. This is the kind of thing I think you could be doing. But, there's so much opportunity for...
There's a lot of opportunity here. To put this in context for people who, of our age, when you were growing up, there wasn't a video game you could put me behind that I couldn't figure out and play and couldn't master, like very quickly. I decided that I had gotten to the point where I was going to just start to enjoy life a little bit more, not like crazy, but I wanted to start playing video games again. So Renee got me a PlayStation 5, I think it is. And I can't play any games on this thing. She got like Call of Duty and a few other things, and even like throwing a grenade. Like you need to have a PhD in Call of Duty to figure out. And then you go online, even if you're willing to look at the cheat codes, what they'll tell you is things like, you will recall in Call of Duty 2008, the way that you did X was by doing Y and Z. It's like, no, I didn't have time back in 2008 to be playing this game. My memory goes back like 45 minutes, like tell me how to do this. And they can't. And it's just, so I think the same thing with AI. The pivot here, the reason is I think if you are not practicing with AI now, not getting better at prompting, as the prompting changes and evolves, you're going to have to go back to square one and figure this all out. The people who are going to succeed the best are the ones who've been doing it all along and learn with the AI that's evolving. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity for younger people here. And I hope the law schools take that seriously because this is a huge opportunity.
I also think that the students are going to be expected to, the senior partners are going to be looking to their recent hires to help them navigate that technology. So they really need to be able to hit the ground running with AI tools when they graduate from law school. It's the same way when I hand my TV remote to my 13-year-old and I say, I can't figure why won't this, is this on Hulu? How do we get to Netflix? So we really need to be preparing students for the realities of the practice of law as it exists now and also 3 years, 5 years down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wish we could keep going. There's so much that's come up, but we've gone for over an hour already. I will definitely have you back. I mean, because there's a lot that we can talk about. Even that last piece about how do you get to the remotes for Roku TVs, a lot of them have a Netflix button. How much is Netflix paying? And what contract terms do they have? And I mean, this is the world. Like when you start looking at IP, it's everywhere. And in functioning ecosystems in our space, there are deals being done and important deals. And that button on the remote makes it so easy to get to Netflix. And so that's valuable.
There's going to be a whole antitrust conversation we could go into.
We could. And I will have you back. Maybe what I'll do is I want to be your first interview after you've successfully climbed the mountain. And
that could be years, given my experience at REI.
Well, you can come back and tell us. I think it's just wonderful that you're taking that on. And I look forward to hearing the stories of that. And I look forward to hearing whatever your next chapter is in the IP space. And hopefully you'll come back and talk to us about both.
I will look forward to that, Gene. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you for listening to IP Watchdog Unleashed. We will be back next week, and we hope you will join us again. In the meantime, please be sure to visit IPWatchdog.com to read all the latest news and information about what is happening in the intellectual property world. And also be sure to subscribe to our free daily email newsletter.